I'm Mark Golub, and in the wake of the stunning New Hampshire primary victories of Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, the media narrative for this primary season has suddenly taken another dramatic turn, so that pundits are now suggesting Bernie Sanders does, in fact, have a chance to defeat Hillary Clinton, while even more are saying that Donald Trump may upset the entire Republican establishment and become the Republican nominee. Now some are arguing that both the Democrat and Republican establishments have been blown up. Well, for some analysis and insight, we turn once again to Dr. Martin Cohen, Associate Professor of Political Science at James Madison University and co-author of a political book that's received a great deal of attention this election cycle, entitled The Party Decides: Presidential Nominations Before and After Reform. And Marty, thank you so much for joining us again.
Thanks for having me again, Mark.
So Marty, when we spoke last time, before the New Hampshire primaries, we both thought it highly unlikely that either Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump could win their party's nomination. The extent to which both Bernie and Donald won in New Hampshire has seemed to change the minds of many pundits in the American media. Has your view been shaken at all?
I would say slightly. They both were favored to win.
Right.
And we knew that and still gave them little chance at winning the nomination eventually. However, when you see it happen, it does tend to shake a little bit of your faith in the predictions that you were making, considering also the size of their victory was, I think, at the upper end of what was expected on both sides.
Yes. You know, Marty, are you a baseball fan at all?
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, you watch a World Series. After game one, whoever wins, everybody says, oh, that team is going to go on to win the World Series. In game two, it flips, and all of a sudden the narrative changes. Mm-hmm. I wonder whether, in some way, this affects the way the media analyzes elections. Yes, there was a win. You and I both expected Sanders and Trump to win in New Hampshire. You're correct. Trump beat the numbers, and Sanders' victory is just stunning in the extent to which he won virtually every category against Hillary Clinton. But there's a long, long way to go yet. And I'm wondering whether you believe, is the media jumping on this bandwagon too soon from your perspective?
I think that's their job, is to interpret, the data that they receive. And there was a big data point on last Tuesday, and that was the New Hampshire results. And there'll be another data point tonight in the Democratic debate and Saturday in the Republican debate. Certainly the debates figured in on the Republican side when you talk about Marco Rubio's stunning gaffe during the debate that really has crippled his campaign, which I don't think anybody saw coming.
Yes. By the way, you had thought that Rubio would be the most likely challenger to Donald Trump. And as you say, because of the debate, he fell to fifth, I believe it was. Do you have any faith still that Rubio can revive and in fact be the challenger to Donald Trump?
I think so. I think he can. I think it's going to be determined in large measure how he comes back on Saturday night with his next opportunity. A week later, he needs to really hit a home run in that debate to sort of squash the new narrative that he's robotic, that he just repeats himself, that there's no there. It came out of nowhere, and it was particularly surprising considering he had parried a lot of criticisms thus far about the credit card that he used, about his flip-flop on immigration, and he just got caught. And, Chris Christie attacked him well, and he needs to really turn it around quickly, or else I think that narrative will sink in and it will be hard for him to get past it.
Okay, Marty, money has become a central issue in these primaries, having to do with the way in which political power and influence is wielded by very wealthy individuals and wealthy corporations. Would you first clarify for us, what is a super PAC?
Well, that's a tough one actually, because the law is vague, and there is a great deal of controversy as to what super PACs are actually allowed to do and what they actually do end up doing. But essentially, a super PAC what it boils down to is it's not coordinated with the campaign, that it can raise unlimited amounts of money and doesn't have to really disclose its donors, but it's not supposed to be able to coordinate with the campaign. And so, for instance, Jeb Bush's super PAC, Right to Rise, has raised over $100 million and is spending a large majority of that money. But it's supposed to be not coordinated with the campaign. And everyone knows that these super PACs are coordinating with these campaigns, and the Federal Election Commission is supposed to regulate that. And they really, because of a stalemate on the commission between Republicans and Democrats, they haven't done anything. So it's really just wild and woolly in terms of what the super PACs are allowed to do.
Okay.
I think it's affected the race, in that candidates who otherwise might not have had enough money to continue with low poll numbers and low support are able to continue because they have the money to spend.
For example?
Well, Ted Cruz has a lot of money that he raised, and that made him viable immediately. Jeb Bush has the money to burn. Really, it looked like he was burning money. And he spent well more than anyone else per vote that he got in New Hampshire. And the fact is, his threshold for continuing was top 5 in New Hampshire, and it's because he had a lot of money. If he had come out of New Hampshire with less money, a top 5 finish wouldn't have been sufficient.
Okay. Does Hillary Clinton have a super PAC?
Yes, there are several super PACs, I'm sure, that are spending on her behalf.
Does Bernie Sanders have a super PAC?
No, not according to him. He does not. And
okay. You've already told us Jeb Bush has a super PAC. Ted Cruz has a super PAC. What about Marco Rubio?
Yes, there's a super PAC that's been spending money on his behalf.
Okay. What about Donald Trump? Well,
he's self-financing, meaning he's does not have a super PAC, but he claims to not be taking any donations, and he certainly isn't spending as much as the other candidates.
Okay, Marty, the point is, both of the winners in New Hampshire are those who have no super PACs. What does this say to you about a shakeup in American politics?
Well, on the Republican side, it's about free media. And Donald Trump is able to, commandeer the media without having to spend money. I mean, whatever he does is covered ad infinitum and to some ad nauseum, but it's covered, and he doesn't have to spend for that publicity where other candidates do. On the Democratic side, it's the advent of social media and the ability of candidates to raise a ton of money in a hurry. And Bernie Sanders raised $7 million in one day after winning New Hampshire. That's something that Gary Hart in 1984, who won New Hampshire but ultimately could not defeat Walter Mondale, was unable to do. There's no way Gary Hart could have raised that amount of money in that short a time. And so we've entered a different era when it comes to money and it comes to media, and it's affected both the Democrat and Republican sides respectively.
Okay, but I want you to speak about how money does influence the electoral process. And Bernie Sanders is speaking over and over again about how there is a corrupt political process whereby the wealthy control what happens with their money. Then the next thing you look at is Bernie Sanders does it without wealthy backers, and Donald Trump does it on his own. And does it in some way validate Bernie Sanders' claim? And do you feel there's a movement within the American people who are also just fed up with the extent to which money buys power and buys political candidates and puts them in their pocket?
Well, I think you have to look at the presidential race as a little bit different from down ballot races. Presidential candidates who are serious are going to get media coverage and they're going to be able to raise money. It's that important of a job. It's that important of a race. It's the only race of its kind going on. I think the effect of money is much more pronounced at the congressional level and at the state legislative level, where the resources aren't as evenly divided and evenly distributed. So incumbents spend and raise a lot more money at the congressional level and the state legislative level than challengers. It's why it's one of the main reasons incumbents win over 90% of the time, even when people say they're fed up with the system.
So, Marty, are you suggesting that Bernie Sanders may be overstating the problem when he talks all the time about how money has corrupted the political system in America?
No, I don't think he's overstating the problem because I think it's systemic. It goes from top to bottom. And the fact that it's distributed evenly at the presidential level still means it's being distributed. I think it has more of an impact, as I said, on lower information down ballot races. But the fact is, the reason we have business as usual in Washington and the state capitals across the country is because business is dominating. And they're able to afford high-priced lobbyists and they're able to fund campaigns. And the fact is, we have the same politicians get elected and reelected over and over because they've dominated the fundraising process.
So what does it mean then if Bernie Sanders and or Donald Trump win for the entire political process if in fact they are not receiving they're not receiving the money that has in essence funded the establishment up till now?
I think it's more a blow to the establishment of both parties and the party elites than it is to the campaign finance system as we know it. The establishment has been able to pick candidates that they find broadly acceptable and are able to shepherd them through the nominating process. We've seen it happen time and time again since the 1970s, and that's really the thesis of our book. That would be undermined and upended if Donald Trump and or Bernie Sanders were to gain their party's nomination. Clearly, they are not the establishment favorite. They are not appreciated by the establishment. And the establishment is at the very least supposed to be able to stop candidates like that from getting nominated.
All right, so let's talk for a moment about the Bernie Sanders phenomenon. He did spectacularly well in New Hampshire. He beat Hillary Clinton by more than 50,000 votes, a record for the New Hampshire primaries. He won 60% to Hillary's 38%. Hillary, on the other hand, did strikingly poorly. Bernie won in virtually every demographic except for those making more than $250,000 a year and older women. And Marty, we're going to put some numbers up on the screen. It shows how Clinton and Sanders did respectively. So the viewers can see that those under 30, Bernie won. 65 and older, Bernie won. Men, he won. He won women, Marty, by 11%, and he won independents almost 3-1. So it's just amazing what he did. Moreover, 60% of Democrats say they do not trust or believe Hillary Clinton. And the mistrust issue now goes beyond the email question or Benghazi, but has to do with Hillary's receiving large sums of money from Wall Street and the question of whether she will release the transcript of her speeches to Goldman Sachs. What do you make of the matchup now between Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders?
Well, I think it boils down to an issue now of race and ethnicity. If you look at the data on Iowa and New Hampshire, they're the whitest states when it comes to the Democratic electorate. They're also two of the most liberal states. And when you put that together, white liberal, that is Bernie Sanders' demographic. And if he can get into her and eat into her demographic, her support among African Americans and Latinos, then he has a real chance to win the nomination. But if her racial and ethnic firewalls hold up, then I think she still will be able to outlast him.
Okay, so again, I won't hold you to it 100%, but what do you expect to happen? Will Bernie do well in South Carolina, Nevada, and the other southern states on Super Tuesday, especially again, since we hear the African Americans, Latinos, lean heavily toward Hillary?
It's hard to predict. He certainly has a lot of momentum, and he has gained the support of Al Sharpton. On the other hand, Hillary Clinton has got the full-throated support of the Congressional Black Caucus. It's really going to come down to whether he can somehow make a connection to these minority groups and these groups that Hillary Clinton has seemed to lock up. Now, if they start to falter and waver, then she doesn't have much defense other than that.
Okay, I want to make sure everybody understands. This is a very different position you're taking today from the last time we spoke. You're now saying this older, Jewish, socialist from Vermont, you think now can win the African American vote and the Latino vote, and in fact be a real threat to Hillary Clinton?
Well, I think he can be a threat, yes, and I also think that there is one more firewall, and that is the superdelegates.
Right.
The superdelegates are heavily in favor of Clinton, and the question would be, how willing are they to go to the mat for her if she starts to fall behind in the actual delegate count?
All right, I want to interrupt you here and put something up on the screen for our viewers. And I want you to talk about the ironic delegate situation, which again is something you touch upon in your book, The Party Decides. Many voters assume that since more people have voted for Bernie Sanders than for Hillary Clinton, that Bernie has amassed more delegates. But lo and behold, here is the actual delegate count. In New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders won 15 delegates as opposed to Hillary Clinton's 8, but Hillary has 6 superdelegates and 2 more have yet to decide, which means that coming out of New Hampshire, Bernie Sanders virtually and Hillary Clinton are tied 15-14. And if we take a look at the delegates, when you look at both Iowa and New Hampshire, Hillary Clinton has more delegates, Marty, 45, to Sanders 36. And again, we have that ultimately you need 2,383 delegates to win the nomination. So we're far, far, far from the end of the process. But it's interesting that even though Sanders virtually tied Clinton in Iowa and beat her soundly in New Hampshire, he is trailing in delegates, again, because of the superdelegates. So from your perspective, what should we take away from this reality of superdelegates?
Well, that the party is one of the ways the party decides, and it's one of the ways the party elites have control over a system that was made more democratic, small d democratic, in the 1970s, but they were able to institute superdelegates shortly after that as a way for elected officials and other party elites to sort of have an inside advantage against what the people might want.
It sounds very frustrating to the people, does it not?
It could be. It could be, yes. It very well could be. And again, in 2008, President Obama was leading Hillary Clinton in the delegate count, and Hillary was hoping that the superdelegates would come over to her, and the superdelegates were very reluctant to overturn what the public had decided. So it's very key that Hillary Clinton stay ahead of Bernie Sanders in the delegate count, or else it's going to be hard for them to maintain legitimacy and for the superdelegates to give it to Hillary.
All right, let's look for a moment at the Republican primary. Again, Donald Trump wins big. He won in virtually every category. He did better than the polls had predicted, and he beat the conventional wisdom that to win New Hampshire, you have to be on the ground shaking people's hands. So now the media is suggesting Trump is unstoppable. I ask you again, is the media drawing conclusions prematurely?
I think so. I would certainly not categorize him as unstoppable. He seems to be, Teflon in some respects, that things that would kill other candidates' campaigns don't seem to hurt him. And that, I think, is because he's got a base. He's got a base of about 30 to 40% of the Republican electorate that are just smitten with him and that have decided probably in the summer or the fall that they're going to vote for him. And they cannot be shaken from that belief.
In New Hampshire, he won every demographic. He won those who are not college educated and those who are. He won men, he won women. very much like Bernie Sanders sort of went against conventional wisdom. What we've heard time and time again since Trump got into the race is, well, only, sort of uneducated blue-collar people are going to support Donald Trump. The truth is, Marty, I meet Jews all the time who say almost apologetically that they are considering voting for Trump. And I'm wondering whether Trump has a much broader appeal than the media would suggest, because many in the media just are, quite honestly, horrified that Donald Trump might become the next president of the United States.
I think so. There's a little bit of an anti-Trump bias in the media reporting. It may be broader, but the question is, how large is it? How many people, what percentage of the electorate is willing to vote for Trump? And I think his ceiling is rather firm. And I don't think people are going to wake up tomorrow or the next day or next week or the next month and say, you know what, I'm going to vote for Trump now. I think that's his limitation, especially in a general election.
So you think those who are sort of leaning toward Trump have already made their decision, and the rest of the electorate, by the way, if Donald Trump has 35%, that means 65% of the voters do not want Donald Trump. You seem to be suggesting as the field winnows, and it may ultimately get to one-on-one, there will be a larger number of people who oppose Trump than who support him, correct?
Yes, and it's in his best interest for the field to remain large, and certainly it's smaller than it was before New Hampshire, and Carly Fiorina and Chris Christie have gotten out. So it's down to really 5, but in a 5-way race, 35% wins handily.
Yes.
And the fact that Rubio did not emerge as the establishment choice was a huge victory for Trump. The fact that Kasich and Bush are still alive is very good for Donald Trump.
So what
the
about
anti-Trump vote is being split?
Yes. Now, what about Ted Cruz? Again, when you watch the media, they seem to say that in a short time it may be a 2-person race between Ted Cruz and Donald Trump on the Republican side. Is that where you think this is heading?
I think it's more likely to be a 2-person race between the winner of Trump and Cruz and the winner of Bush, Kasich, and Rubio. I think that the party is the establishment, the elites that are horrified by Trump, that are horrified by Cruz, still have one last gasp in them. And I think it is to get behind one of those 3 candidates, the one who seems the strongest, and to put them in a position where they fight against Trump and or Cruz.
I think you say it very, very well. By the way, at one point everybody was writing Jeb Bush off. Now Jeb Bush seems to be on the ascendancy, and I would not be surprised at all if in the end, Marty, we ultimately have Hillary Clinton facing off against Jeb Bush in the national election.
Well, that would be a story that would certainly be beneficial to our book. That would be what our book would have predicted at the very beginning. And consistently, if you get the establishment candidates like Clinton and Bush in this year, which is so difficult for the establishment, and the fact is really that Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush, the only thing going for them is their establishment support.
Yes.
And they have been time and time again to be subpar, to say the least, candidates. It would be an establishment miracle if Clinton Bush was the showdown in November.
Okay, I want everybody to hear Marty Cohen says it would be a political miracle if the establishment ultimately somehow puts Hillary Clinton and Jeb Bush into the national election.
Mostly for Jeb Bush.
Okay. So at the same time, Bernie Sanders has done remarkably well. And again, he's this Jew from Brooklyn. He's an older guy, but he's a Jew from Brooklyn. And although I have seen, you're right, Marty, I have seen of late more pieces coming out that reference the fact he's Jewish, It's not normally done in a critical fashion. The New York Times had a piece, Marty, where they said they finally discovered which kibbutz Bernie Sanders served in Israel, and it was, very, very left-leaning. What's the surprise here?
Right.
But it seemed, I wonder whether the Jewish community appreciates the fact that a Jew is coming this close to a major party nomination and could perhaps be elected president. And, we saw an African American become president. One of Hillary Clinton's themes, which seems now to be getting her in trouble, is that there should be a woman, and women should celebrate the fact that a woman would finally become president of the United States. I wonder whether the Jewish community really appreciates what it means that a Jew it's almost like, so what that he's a Jew, is a serious candidate for a nomination to President of the United States. Any comment?
Well, I think it could become a source of pride for many American Jews if they can overcome their reluctance to believe it actually could happen.
Yes.
I mean, we're not the most optimistic bunch on a good day, and maybe the reticence to believe is what's keeping everyone from getting so excited. But in the end, just like women will vote for the candidate they think is best, I think Jews will look at Bernie Sanders and look at the Republican if he were to be the nominee, and they'll decide on the issues mostly.
I agree with you. Marty, again, it is always a pleasure to talk to you, and we will continue to call you. And as you say, the winds and fortunes continue to change. We'll see what happens coming out of South Carolina and whether you want to, again, adjust your position. But I thank you so much for giving yourself and giving us time here on JBS. Thank you, Marty.
My pleasure. No problem. Goodbye.
Be well. The thoughts of Dr. Martin Cohen, Associate Professor of Political Science at James Madison University, co-author of a political book, again, that's received a great deal of attention this election cycle, entitled The Party Decides Presidential Nominations Before and After Reform. It is so interesting to see the twists and turns this election takes. And again, we're especially interested in looking at it from a Jewish perspective, and some of the people we'll have coming up on election 2016 will specifically address Jewish concerns. Of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the election. Please email me or write me or post on our Facebook page or tweet me. I look forward to hearing from many of you. My thanks as always to Director Sloan Copeland, Production Coordinator Serge Goldberg, JBS's Associate Director Dara Golub, and the producer of Election 2016, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.